The moment I stood up at our anniversary dinner 3 months later and announced that I owned every single luxury property Vanessa Sterling had sold in the past 2 years, watching my husband Marcus's face drain of color was worth every sleepless night I'd spent planning my revenge. But let me take you back to where this all began, on a warm September evening in Austin, when I thought I was throwing the perfect 40th birthday party for the man I loved, only to discover he'd been planning his exit strategy with his real estate agent for months. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Texas sunset painted our Westlake Hills home in shades of amber and gold as I put the finishing touches on what I believed would be Marcus's most memorable birthday celebration. Our modern two-story house had never looked more beautiful, with string lights cascading from the oak trees in our backyard and elegant arrangements of white peonies adorning every surface. I had spent weeks coordinating with caterers, selecting the perfect wine pairings, and ensuring every detail reflected the sophistication Marcus appreciated. After 15 years of marriage, I knew exactly how to make him feel special, or so I thought. The guest list included our closest friends, his business associates from the construction company, and several neighbors from our exclusive community. I had even invited his difficult mother, Patricia, who rarely approved of anything I did, hoping this perfect evening might finally earn her grudging respect. What I hadn't expected was to see Vanessa Sterling gliding through our front door in a stunning red dress that hugged her curves in all the right places, her platinum blonde hair cascading over her shoulders like liquid silk. Marcus had mentioned inviting his real estate agent several times over the past few months, always with some business justification about potential investment properties or networking opportunities. Vanessa had helped us purchase our current home 3 years ago, and according to Marcus, she had become invaluable in identifying prime real estate opportunities around Austin. I remembered her as professional but unremarkable during our house hunting process, but the woman who walked into our party that night was anything but forgettable. She moved through our home with an unsettling familiarity, complimenting the renovations we'd made to the kitchen and commenting on the view from our master bedroom windows. When I raised an eyebrow at that particular observation, she laughed melodiously and explained that she had been advising Marcus on property improvements that would increase our home's value. It seemed reasonable enough, but something in the way she said it, with a slight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, sent an uncomfortable shiver down my spine. Throughout the evening, I noticed Marcus gravitating toward Vanessa with increasing frequency. During cocktail hour, they stood near the pool discussing market trends with an intimacy that seemed to exclude everyone else in their vicinity. When dinner was served on our spacious deck, somehow Vanessa ended up seated directly across from Marcus, despite my careful seating arrangements that had placed her at the opposite end of the table. I watched as they shared private jokes and meaningful glances while I played the role of the perfect hostess, ensuring everyone's wine glasses remained full and the conversation flowed smoothly. The first real crack in my carefully constructed evening came when David Walsh, Marcus's business partner and oldest friend, pulled me aside near the kitchen. David had always been straightforward with me, never one to engage in social pleasantries when something important needed to be said. His weathered face bore an expression of concern that immediately put me on alert. "Rachel, we need to talk," he said in a low voice, glancing around to ensure we wouldn't be overheard. "I don't know how to say this, but there's something you should know about Marcus and that real estate woman." My heart began to race, but I forced my voice to remain steady. "What do you mean, David?" He ran a hand through his graying hair, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. "I've seen them together at the Driscoll Hotel bar twice in the past month. Both times they looked like more than business associates, if you catch my meaning." The words hit me like a physical blow, but years of maintaining composure and challenging situations kicked in immediately. I had built a successful marketing career by thinking quickly under pressure, and that skill served me well in this moment of personal crisis. I thanked David for his honesty, and assured him I would handle the situation appropriately, though internally I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. As the evening progressed, I began observing Marcus and Vanessa with new eyes, noting details I had previously dismissed as innocent professional interaction. The way Vanessa's hand lingered on Marcus's arm when she laughed at his stories, how Marcus's eyes sought hers across crowded conversations, the almost imperceptible nod he gave her when she announced she needed to leave early, followed by his own departure 15 minutes later, under the pretense of having an early morning meeting. After the last guest departed and our house fell silent, I sat alone in our living room still wearing my elegant black cocktail dress, surrounded by the remnants of what should have been a perfect celebration. Empty wine glasses and crumpled napkins scattered across our coffee table told the story of an evening that had ended very differently than I had planned. Marcus had returned home well past midnight, claiming he had stopped by the office to review blueprints for an upcoming project. His explanation felt hollow, delivered with the kind of casual dismissiveness that suggested he no longer felt the need to make his lies particularly convincing. That night, as I lay in our king-sized bed listening to Marcus's steady breathing, beside me, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of our marriage forever. I was not going to confront him immediately with accusations based on secondhand information and suspicious behavior. Instead, I was going to gather evidence, understand the full scope of what I was dealing with, and position myself strategically before making any moves. My marketing background had taught me the importance of thorough research and careful planning before launching any campaign, and this situation required the same methodical approach. The next morning, I began my investigation with the kind of systematic thoroughness that had made me successful in my professional life. While Marcus showered and prepared for work, I accessed his laptop using the password he had never bothered to change since our early years of marriage. His browser history revealed frequent visits to luxury real estate listings, but more concerning were the searches for Austin's most expensive rental properties and high-end apartment complexes. Mixed among legitimate business emails were threads with Vanessa that used language far more intimate than any professional relationship warranted. One particular exchange made my stomach churn. Vanessa had written about showing him a private property that she thought would be perfect for your new beginning, followed by Marcus's response about finally being ready to make the move we discussed. The timestamp showed this conversation had taken place just 3 days before his birthday party, while I was busy coordinating catering details and selecting the perfect gift for the man I thought I knew. Over the following weeks, I developed a routine of careful observation and evidence collection that would have impressed any private investigator. I tracked Marcus's movements through our shared banking app, noting charges at restaurants where he claimed to be in business meetings, but which our financial records showed were clearly romantic dinners for two. I photographed text messages when his phone was left unattended, documenting conversations that revealed a relationship spanning several months. Most damaging of all, I discovered that Marcus had already consulted with a divorce attorney, based on a consultation fee that appeared on our credit card statement. The picture that emerged was of a man who had been planning his exit strategy with calculated precision, while maintaining the facade of a committed husband. Vanessa wasn't just his real estate agent. She was his escape plan, his midlife crisis, wrapped in designer clothes and professional credentials. The property searches weren't for investment opportunities as he had claimed, but for the luxury lifestyle he planned to build with his new partner once he discarded his current life. What hurt more than the betrayal itself was the realization of how long this deception had been ongoing. Marcus hadn't fallen into an impulsive affair. He had orchestrated a careful transition from our marriage to his new relationship with the kind of strategic planning he brought to his construction projects. Every late night at the office, every business trip that seemed to extend unexpectedly, every moment when he seemed distracted or distant, had been part of a larger plan to extricate himself from our life together while positioning himself for maximum advantage in the dissolution of our marriage. The most chilling discovery came when I found printed emails discussing property transfers and asset protection strategies. Marcus and Vanessa had been consulting with financial advisors about how to structure their joint investments in ways that would minimize his exposure during divorce proceedings. They weren't just planning a life together. They were planning to leave me with as little as possible from the marriage we had built over 15 years. As I absorbed the full scope of their deception, sitting in my home office surrounded by printed evidence of my husband's betrayal, I felt something shift inside me. The initial shock and hurt were transforming into something colder and more focused. Marcus had underestimated me, viewing me as an obstacle to be managed rather than an opponent to be respected. He had forgotten that the same skills that made me successful in marketing could be applied to much more personal battles. I began researching Vanessa Sterling with the same thoroughness I brought to competitive analysis in my professional work. Her social media presence painted the picture of a successful woman who enjoyed the finer things in life, frequently posting photos from expensive restaurants, luxury shopping trips, and exclusive events around Austin. Her professional website boasted impressive sales figures and glowing testimonials from high-profile clients, establishing her reputation as one of the city's premier real estate agents, specializing in luxury properties. But as I dug deeper into public records and professional databases, I discovered interesting patterns in Vanessa's business practices. She had an unusual tendency to represent both buyers and sellers in high-value transactions, a practice that, while legal, created potential conflicts of interest that savvy investors typically avoided. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. More intriguingly, several of her most expensive sales had involved properties that were purchased and then resold within remarkably short timeframes, suggesting either exceptional market timing or insider knowledge that gave her clients significant advantages. The revelation that would ultimately shape my strategy came when I cross-referenced Vanessa's sales records with Austin's property databases and discovered something that made me smile for the first time in weeks. In her eagerness to establish herself as the city's go-to agent for luxury properties, Vanessa had concentrated her efforts on a relatively small segment of the market. Nearly 70% of her high-value sales over the past 2 years had involved properties in just 3 exclusive developments around Austin, creating a portfolio concentration that represented both her greatest professional achievement and her most significant vulnerability. As I sat in my office that evening, surrounded by printed property records, sales documents, and financial statements, I realized that Marcus and Vanessa had handed me the perfect opportunity for revenge. They had been so focused on planning their future together that they had failed to consider how their past might be used against them. Vanessa's success in the luxury real estate market had created a paper trail that could be traced, analyzed, and ultimately exploited by someone with sufficient resources and motivation. The plan that began forming in my mind was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential impact. If Marcus wanted to leave our marriage for his real estate agent, then he was going to discover exactly what happened when someone decided to play games in the real estate market with a woman who had both the intelligence to identify opportunities and the resources to capitalize on them. Vanessa Sterling was about to learn that when you built your professional reputation on a concentrated portfolio of luxury properties, you also created the perfect target for someone determined to turn your greatest strength into your most catastrophic weakness. That night, as I lay in bed next to my unsuspecting husband, I was no longer the hurt and confused wife who had discovered his betrayal. I was a woman with a plan, and that plan was going to make both Marcus and Vanessa deeply regret the day they decided to underestimate Rachel Thompson. The morning after my discovery, I woke with the kind of clarity that only comes from having a purpose. While Marcus showered and hummed cheerfully, completely unaware that his secret was no longer secret, I made coffee and began planning my next moves with the precision of a military strategist. My first call was to Linda Hayes, my neighbor and closest friend, who had always possessed an uncanny ability to gather information about everyone in our social circle. Linda arrived at my house 20 minutes later, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour, carrying 2 croissants from our favorite bakery and wearing the expression of someone ready for serious conversation. We settled in my sunroom, surrounded by the morning light filtering through the windows, and I carefully laid out what I had discovered about Marcus and Vanessa without revealing the full extent of my knowledge. "I need to understand exactly who we're dealing with," I told Linda, sipping my coffee while watching her process the information. "What do you know about Vanessa Sterling beyond her professional reputation?" Linda's eyes narrowed with the focused intensity she brought to neighborhood politics and charity committee work. "That woman has been making waves in Austin real estate for the past 3 years," she said, settling back in her chair. "She came here from Dallas after some kind of scandal involving a married client, though nobody talks about the details openly. What I do know is that she has a pattern of getting very close to her male clients, particularly the wealthy married ones." This information aligned perfectly with what I had begun to suspect. Vanessa wasn't simply an opportunistic woman who had fallen for my husband. She was someone who had built her career around relationships that blurred professional and personal boundaries. Understanding her methodology would be crucial to developing an effective counter-strategy. "Tell me about her recent sales," I requested, pulling out a notebook to document everything Linda shared. "Who has she been representing, and what kinds of properties has she been moving?" Linda leaned forward, clearly relishing the opportunity to share what she knew. "She's cornered the market on those new luxury developments near Lake Travis. You know the ones: Waterstone Estates, Pinnacle Ridge, and that ultra-exclusive Meridian Heights community where lots start at $2 million. She's been the listing agent for most of the high-end sales in those areas over the past 2 years. My pulse quickened as Linda's information confirmed what my research had suggested. Vanessa had indeed concentrated her efforts on a specific segment of Austin's luxury market, building relationships with developers and establishing herself as the go-to agent for the city's most expensive properties. This specialization had made her wealthy and influential, but it had also created the kind of market concentration that could be exploited by someone with sufficient resources and determination. "There's something else," Linda continued, glancing around as if checking for eavesdroppers. "Amy Rodriguez, who works at the real estate office downtown, mentioned that Vanessa has been pushing several of her clients toward quick sales lately. Apparently, she's been telling people that the luxury market is about to shift, and they should cash out while prices are still high." This detail was particularly interesting because it suggested Vanessa might be manipulating her clients' decisions based on information that wasn't publicly available. If she was encouraging sales to create inventory for specific buyers, or if she had advanced knowledge of market conditions that would affect property values, she might be crossing ethical lines that could be documented and exposed. After Linda left, I spent the morning researching the 3 developments she had mentioned, diving deep into property records, sales histories, and ownership transfers. What I discovered was even more promising than I had hoped. Vanessa's sales in these communities represented not just professional success, but a concentrated portfolio that could be systematically targeted by someone with patience and financial resources. Waterstone Estates, the smallest of the 3 developments, consisted of 47 luxury homes ranging from 1, 2 to 3, $8 million. Vanessa had been involved in 31 of the sales since the development opened, representing an impressive market share that also meant she had significant ongoing relationships with most of the property owners. Pinnacle Ridge was larger, with 83 homes in a similar price range, and Vanessa had handled 46 of those transactions. Meridian Heights, the most exclusive community, had only 28 properties, but Vanessa had sold 19 of them, including several that had changed hands multiple times. The pattern that emerged from this data was both impressive and vulnerable. Vanessa had built her reputation on being the dominant force in Austin's ultra-luxury market, but she had also created a situation where her professional success was heavily dependent on a relatively small number of properties and relationships. If someone were to systematically acquire properties in these developments, they could potentially control a significant portion of Vanessa's professional network and income stream. More importantly, I realized that Marcus's construction company had been involved in some of the development work for these communities. His business relationship with the developers meant he had access to information about upcoming projects, planned improvements, and market timing that could be invaluable to a real estate agent looking to position her clients advantageously. The affair wasn't just personal, it was also professional, with Vanessa using her relationship with Marcus to gain insider information that gave her clients unfair advantages in the luxury market. That afternoon, while Marcus was supposedly meeting with potential investors, I drove to each of the 3 developments to see them firsthand. Waterstone Estates impressed me with its manicured landscapes and elegant architecture, homes that clearly catered to Austin's tech executives and successful professionals. Pinnacle Ridge offered larger lots and more privacy, attracting buyers who valued exclusivity over convenience. Meridian Heights was breathtaking, with custom homes that represented the pinnacle of luxury living in the Austin area. As I toured these communities, I began to understand why Vanessa had focused her efforts here. These weren't just expensive houses. They were lifestyle statements, the kind of properties that attracted buyers who viewed real estate as both investment and status symbol. The owners in these developments would be sophisticated, wealthy, and accustomed to working with premium service providers. Gaining their trust and loyalty would require exceptional skill and dedication, but once established, those relationships would be incredibly valuable. I also noticed something else during my tours. Several properties in each development had for sale signs with Vanessa's name prominently displayed, suggesting a steady stream of inventory that would require constant attention and marketing. If someone were to systematically purchase these properties, they wouldn't just be acquiring real estate. They would be disrupting Vanessa's business model and potentially damaging her reputation with the developers who relied on her to move their most expensive inventory. That evening, I called my financial advisor to discuss my options for making significant real estate investments. Margaret Chen had been managing my portfolio for 8 years, and I trusted her judgment completely. When I explained that I was interested in diversifying into luxury real estate, specifically properties in certain Austin developments, she was initially enthusiastic about the potential returns. The Austin luxury market has been incredibly strong, Margaret confirmed during our phone conversation. Properties in those developments have appreciated consistently, and the rental market for executive housing is robust. Are you thinking about this as a long-term investment strategy or something more immediate? I chose my words carefully, not wanting to reveal the personal motivations behind my interest. I'm looking at this as both an investment opportunity and a way to gain more control over our financial future. I'd like to move quickly on the right properties, possibly making multiple purchases over the next few months. Margaret paused, and I could hear her typing as she reviewed my financial position. You certainly have the resources for substantial real estate investments, especially if we liquidate some of your current holdings. The question is whether you want to concentrate this heavily in one market segment. Diversification is usually the safer approach. I understand the risks, I assured her, but I also see an opportunity that might not be available for long. Can you help me identify properties that might be coming on the market soon, particularly ones where we could move quickly if the right situation arose? Margaret agreed to research current listings and upcoming inventory in the developments I had specified. She also recommended a real estate attorney who specialized in high-value transactions, someone who could ensure that any purchases I made would be structured properly for both tax efficiency and legal protection. As I ended the call with Margaret, I felt the satisfaction that comes from taking concrete steps toward a clearly defined goal. Marcus and Vanessa thought they were playing a game where only they knew the rules, but they had drastically underestimated both my intelligence and my resources. While they were focused on planning their future together, I was systematically positioning myself to control the professional foundation that made their relationship possible. The next morning brought an unexpected opportunity when Claire Thompson, Marcus's younger sister, called to invite me to lunch. Claire had always been the rebellious member of the Thompson family, choosing art over business and authenticity over appearances. Her relationship with Marcus had been strained for years, particularly after she had criticized his increasing focus on material success at the expense of personal relationships. We met at a quiet restaurant in downtown Austin, and Claire's first words confirmed that she had noticed the same changes in Marcus that had been troubling me for months. "My brother has been acting strange lately," she said without preamble, settling into our booth with the directness that characterized all her interactions. "He's always been ambitious, but there's something different about him now, something calculating." I decided to trust Claire with a carefully edited version of what I had discovered, focusing on Marcus's secretive behavior and suspicious activities without revealing the full extent of my knowledge about his relationship with Vanessa. Claire listened intently, her artistic intuition picking up on nuances that others might miss. "I knew something was wrong at his birthday party," Claire said, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "The way he was acting around that real estate woman, and how uncomfortable you looked every time they talked. Marcus has never been good at hiding things, but he's never been deliberately deceptive either." Claire's perspective was valuable, because she knew Marcus better than almost anyone, having grown up watching him navigate family dynamics and social situations. Her assessment that his current behavior represented a fundamental change rather than simple indiscretion confirmed my suspicion that this affair was part of a larger transformation in his character and priorities. "There's something else," Claire continued, lowering her voice. "I ran into David Walsh at the grocery store yesterday, and he seemed really uncomfortable when I mentioned seeing him at the party. He said something about hoping Marcus knew what he was doing, and that some decisions couldn't be undone." This information suggested that David's concerns about Marcus and Vanessa extended beyond what he had shared with me at the party. As Marcus's business partner and oldest friend, David, would be in a position to observe changes in Marcus's behavior and decision-making that others might miss. If David was worried enough to express concern to Claire, the situation was probably more serious than I had initially realized. "Claire, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me," I said, leaning forward across the table. "Have you noticed Marcus making any changes to his business practices or financial arrangements lately? Anything that seemed unusual or out of character?" Claire considered the question carefully before responding. "Actually, yes. He mentioned restructuring some of his business investments and talking about expanding into new markets. But when I asked him about details, he was vague in a way that wasn't like him. Marcus usually loves talking about his business plans." This aligned with the property searches and financial consultations I had discovered, confirming that Marcus's preparations for leaving our marriage extended into his professional life as well. He wasn't just planning a personal exit strategy. He was positioning his business assets to support his new life with Vanessa, while minimizing his obligations to our shared financial future. After lunch with Claire, I spent the afternoon developing a more sophisticated understanding of how Marcus's business interests intersected with Vanessa's real estate activities. Using public records and business databases, I traced connections between Marcus's construction projects and several of the developments where Vanessa had established her dominance in the luxury market. The pattern that emerged was more complex and concerning than I had initially realized. Marcus's company had been involved in infrastructure work for Pinnacle Ridge and had consulting contracts for upcoming phases of development at Meridian Heights. This meant he had access to timelines, design specifications, and market positioning strategies that would be incredibly valuable to a real estate agent trying to advise clients on investment opportunities. More troubling was my discovery that Marcus had recently formed a new business entity, registered just 6 weeks ago, with Vanessa listed as a partner. The company's stated purpose was real estate development consulting, but the timing and structure suggested it was designed to formalize their professional collaboration in ways that would benefit both of them financially, while potentially creating conflicts of interest with Marcus's existing business partnerships. This new company represented a direct threat to David Walsh, who had been Marcus's partner for 12 years and who presumably had no knowledge of Marcus's side venture with Vanessa. If Marcus was using information from his established business to benefit his new partnership, he was not only betraying our marriage, but also betraying the professional relationship that had been the foundation of his career success. That evening, I made a decision that would prove crucial to everything that followed. Instead of continuing to gather information passively, I was going to take direct action to position myself advantageously before Marcus and Vanessa realized their activities were being monitored and documented. My conversation with Margaret had confirmed that I had the financial resources to make significant real estate purchases, and my research had identified specific properties that would allow me to systematically disrupt Vanessa's business model. I called Margaret back and authorized her to begin the process of liquidating certain investments to free up capital for real estate purchases. I also scheduled meetings with the real estate attorney she had recommended and began developing a strategy for acquiring properties in ways that would be both legally sound and strategically effective. The plan taking shape in my mind was ambitious and potentially expensive, but it offered the possibility of turning Marcus and Vanessa's greatest strength into their most devastating weakness. If they wanted to build their future together on the foundation of Austin's luxury real estate market, they were going to discover what happened when someone with superior resources and motivation decided to acquire that foundation for herself. As I prepared for bed that night, I felt a sense of anticipation I hadn't experienced since the early days of building my marketing career. Marcus and Vanessa thought they were several moves ahead in a game where they controlled all the variables, but they had made the crucial mistake of underestimating their opposition. They were about to learn that when you built your plans on someone else's property, you needed to make sure that someone couldn't simply buy the ground out from under you. The woman who had discovered her husband's betrayal at his birthday party was gone, replaced by someone who understood exactly how to turn personal devastation into strategic advantage. Marcus wanted a new life with his real estate agent, and I was going to make sure he got exactly what he deserved. 3 weeks into my investigation, Claire called me with news that would accelerate my timeline dramatically. She had been having coffee with Patricia Thompson, Marcus's mother, when Patricia inadvertently revealed information that changed everything I thought I knew about the situation. "You're not going to believe what Mother Thompson told me," Claire said, her voice tight with anger as we sat in my kitchen the next morning. "She's known about Marcus and the real estate woman for months. Not only has she known, but she's been encouraging it." I set down my coffee cup carefully, processing this revelation. Patricia had always been cold toward me, but I had attributed her behavior to the general disapproval she seemed to harbor for anyone who didn't meet her exacting standards. The possibility that she had been actively working against our marriage, while maintaining the pretense of family dinners and holiday celebrations, was both shocking and infuriating. "What exactly did she say?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the surge of adrenaline coursing through me. Claire rubbed her temples, clearly disturbed by what she had learned. She told me that Marcus deserved someone who could truly support his ambitions, someone who understood the business world he was trying to navigate. She said you were holding him back from his potential, and that Vanessa Sterling was exactly the kind of woman who could help him achieve the success he was meant to have. The casual cruelty of Patricia's assessment hit me like a physical blow, but it also provided crucial insight into the dynamics I was facing. This wasn't just about Marcus having an affair. It was about a coordinated effort by multiple people to reconstruct his life according to their vision of what would be best for him, regardless of the commitments he had made or the damage their plans would cause. "There's more," Claire continued, her expression growing darker. "Patricia mentioned that she had been helping Marcus restructure his finances to protect his assets. She's been consulting with her own attorney about the best strategies for minimizing what you would be entitled to in a divorce. This information was devastating, but also strategically valuable. If Patricia was involved in Marcus's planning, it meant the conspiracy against me was broader and more organized than I had realized. It also meant that my window for taking preemptive action was closing rapidly, as they were clearly moving toward formal legal proceedings that would drastically limit my options. Claire, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to understand that what I'm about to tell you must remain completely confidential, I said, making the decision to trust her with more information than I had shared with anyone else. Over the next hour, I walked Claire through everything I had discovered about Marcus and Vanessa's relationship, their business partnership, and my research into Vanessa's real estate activities. I showed her the evidence I had gathered and explained the strategy I was developing to acquire properties in the developments where Vanessa had built her reputation. Claire listened with the focused intensity she brought to her art, asking insightful questions and immediately grasping the implications of what I was planning. When I finished explaining my approach, she was quiet for several minutes, considering everything I had shared. "This is brilliant," she finally said, "but it's also incredibly risky. If Marcus and his mother realize what you're doing before you've positioned yourself properly, they could take legal action to freeze your assets or prevent you from making these purchases." Her concern was valid and highlighted the need for me to move quickly while maintaining absolute secrecy about my activities. I had already begun working with Margaret to liquidate investments, but I needed to accelerate that process and begin making actual property purchases before anyone in Marcus's circle became aware of my plans. "I want to help," Claire said suddenly, leaning forward with the same determination I had seen her bring to challenging art projects. "I have resources of my own, and I know how my brother thinks. If we're going to do this, we need to do it comprehensively enough that they can't recover from the damage." Claire's offer was unexpected, but potentially game-changing. As Marcus's sister, she had intimate knowledge of his business relationships and decision-making patterns that would be invaluable in predicting his responses to various scenarios. More importantly, her financial resources would allow us to make larger and more frequent property purchases, creating a more devastating impact on Vanessa's business model. We spent the rest of the morning developing a more sophisticated strategy that leveraged both of our strengths and resources. Claire would focus on properties in Meridian Heights, the most exclusive development, where her connections in Austin's art and culture scene had given her relationships with several current property owners. I would concentrate on Waterstone, Estates, and Pinnacle Ridge, where my research had identified the greatest concentration of Vanessa's recent sales activity. The key to our approach would be speed and coordination. Rather than acquiring properties one at a time over several months, we would target multiple purchases simultaneously, creating a market disruption that would be impossible for Vanessa to ignore or counteract. We would also structure our purchases through different entities and legal arrangements, making it difficult for anyone to immediately recognize the pattern of our activities. That afternoon, I met with Thomas Bradley, the real estate attorney Margaret had recommended, to discuss the legal framework for our property acquisition strategy. Thomas was a distinguished man in his early 60s who specialized in high-value transactions and had extensive experience with complex real estate investments. "What you're describing is certainly possible," Thomas said after I explained our objectives in carefully neutral terms. "But it will require significant coordination and careful attention to legal details. Acquiring multiple properties in a short time frame, particularly in concentrated geographic areas, can trigger various regulatory requirements and disclosure obligations." Thomas walked me through the process of establishing investment entities that would allow us to make purchases efficiently while maintaining privacy about our ultimate objectives. He also explained how to structure our acquisitions to minimize tax implications and maximize our flexibility for future decisions about the properties. "There's something else you should consider," Thomas added as our meeting concluded. "If your ultimate goal is to influence market conditions in these developments, you'll want to think carefully about your long-term strategy for the properties. Simply owning them won't necessarily give you the leverage you're seeking, unless you're prepared to actively manage them as investments. His point was well taken, and led me to develop a more comprehensive approach to the properties we would acquire. Rather than simply purchasing them and holding them passively, we would position ourselves as active participants in each development's community, building relationships with other property owners and establishing ourselves as influential voices in decisions about future development and community management. The following week brought an unexpected opportunity when Linda Hayes mentioned that Amy Rodriguez, her contact at the downtown real estate office, had shared gossip about significant changes happening in Vanessa Sterling's business practices. According to Amy, Vanessa had been pushing several of her clients toward quick sales, claiming she had buyers lined up who were willing to pay premium prices for immediate transactions. This information was particularly interesting because it suggested Vanessa was manipulating market conditions to create inventory for specific buyers, possibly including Marcus as he prepared to establish his new life with her. If we could identify which properties Vanessa was encouraging her clients to sell, we might be able to intercept those transactions and acquire the properties ourselves. I asked Linda to arrange a casual meeting with Amy Rodriguez, ostensibly to discuss the general real estate market, but actually to gather more specific information about Vanessa's recent activities. Amy proved to be a valuable source of intelligence, eager to share what she knew about a competitor who had been dominating the luxury market that Amy aspired to enter herself. "Vanessa's been acting strange lately," Amy confided as we sat in a coffee shop near her office. "She's been telling clients that she has exclusive access to buyers who are willing to pay above market value, but she won't say who these buyers are or how she connected with them. It's creating some tension in our office because other agents are losing potential listings to her promises of quick, high-value sales." Amy also revealed that Vanessa had been spending significant time at construction sites around the city, particularly projects involving high-end residential developments. This confirmed my suspicion that her relationship with Marcus was giving her access to information about upcoming properties and development timelines that other agents didn't have. "There's something else," Amy added, glancing around to ensure our conversation remained private. "Vanessa's been asking a lot of questions about property ownership structures and investment entities. She's been consulting with attorneys about how wealthy clients typically structure their real estate purchases to maintain privacy and tax advantages." This detail was particularly concerning because it suggested Vanessa and Marcus were planning their own property acquisitions, possibly using the same strategies I was developing to protect their investments and maintain secrecy about their activities. If they were moving towards significant real estate purchases of their own, my window for effective action was even smaller than I had realized. That evening, I called Margaret to accelerate our timeline for liquidating investments and making our first property purchases. The market intelligence I had gathered suggested that waiting any longer would risk allowing Marcus and Vanessa to implement their own strategies before we could establish our position effectively. "I've identified 3 properties that meet your criteria and are currently available for immediate purchase," Margaret reported. "One in Waterstone Estates, one in Pinnacle Ridge, and one in Meridian Heights. The total investment would be approximately $8.2 million, which represents a significant portion of your liquid assets." The financial commitment was substantial, but the strategic value of owning properties in all 3 developments simultaneously would be worth the risk. More importantly, these initial purchases would establish our presence in each community and provide the foundation for additional acquisitions as opportunities arose. I authorized Margaret to proceed with all 3 purchases, structuring them through the investment entities Thomas Bradley had established for maximum legal protection and privacy. Claire made similar arrangements for 2 additional properties in Meridian Heights, creating an immediate concentration of ownership that would be impossible for Vanessa to ignore once she became aware of the transactions. The legal and financial arrangements took nearly 2 weeks to complete, during which time I maintained the careful pretense of normal married life while documenting additional evidence of Marcus's preparations for ending our marriage. His behavior had become increasingly careless, with longer absences from home and less effort to maintain believable explanations for his activities. During this period, I also discovered that Marcus had been consulting with a private investigator, apparently attempting to gather information about my own financial activities and potential legal vulnerabilities. This revelation confirmed that he was preparing for an adversarial divorce proceeding and was actively working to position himself advantageously at my expense. The knowledge that Marcus was investigating me while I was investigating him added an element of urgency to everything I was doing. We were essentially racing against each other to gather information and position ourselves strategically, with the winner being whoever could establish the strongest position before the other realized what was happening. 3 weeks after our initial meeting with Thomas Bradley, I received confirmation that all 5 property purchases had been completed successfully. Claire and I now owned significant real estate holdings in all 3 developments, where Vanessa had built her reputation, representing approximately $14 million in combined investments and giving us substantial influence over market conditions in Austin's most exclusive residential communities. The psychological impact of achieving this milestone was profound. For the first time since discovering Marcus's betrayal, I felt like I was operating from a position of strength rather than simply reacting to circumstances beyond my control. The properties we had acquired weren't just financial investments. They were weapons in a war that Marcus and Vanessa didn't even realize had begun. Our next step would be to begin using our new property ownership to gather additional intelligence about Vanessa's business relationships and future plans. As property owners in these exclusive developments, we would have access to community meetings, development planning discussions, and social networks that would provide unprecedented insight into the luxury real estate market that Vanessa depended on for her success. Claire and I spent an evening touring our new properties, developing plans for how we would position ourselves within each community to maximize our influence and information gathering capabilities. The homes were beautiful, but more importantly, they represented strategic assets that would allow us to control market conditions and disrupt business relationships in ways that would be devastating to someone whose professional success depended on maintaining exclusive access to this segment of Austin's real estate market. As we stood on the deck of our Meridian Heights property, overlooking the city lights of Austin, I realized that the woman who had been betrayed at her husband's birthday party no longer existed. In her place was someone who understood exactly how to turn personal devastation into strategic advantage. Someone who had the resources and determination to ensure that Marcus and Vanessa's betrayal would cost them far more than they had ever imagined possible. The game had changed completely, and neither Marcus nor Vanessa had any idea that their greatest professional asset was now controlled by the woman they had dismissed as an obstacle to be managed rather than an opponent to be feared. They were about to discover exactly what happened when someone with superior resources and unlimited motivation decided to compete in their chosen arena. The first community meeting at Waterstone Estates provided exactly the kind of intelligence I had hoped for when Claire and I decided to acquire properties in these exclusive developments. As new homeowners, we were invited to participate in discussions about upcoming amenities, security protocols, and development planning that would affect property values throughout the community. What I discovered during that meeting exceeded my most optimistic expectations for gathering actionable information about Vanessa's business operations. The meeting was held in the elegant clubhouse that served as the social center for the development, with approximately 30 property owners in attendance, along with representatives from the management company and the original developers. The atmosphere was refined but businesslike, with residents who clearly viewed their homes as significant financial investments rather than simply places to live. During the presentation about planned improvements to the community's tennis facilities and walking trails, I learned that Vanessa Sterling had been consulting with the developers about marketing strategies for the remaining unsold lots in the Eider development. According to the development manager, Vanessa had proposed an exclusive partnership arrangement that would give her preferential access to new inventory in exchange for guaranteed sales volumes and premium pricing commitments. This information was valuable for several reasons. First, it confirmed that Vanessa's success in these communities wasn't just the result of superior marketing or client relationships. She was actively negotiating arrangements that gave her competitive advantages other agents couldn't match. Second, it revealed that her business model depended heavily on maintaining these exclusive partnerships, which meant disrupting those relationships would have a direct impact on her ability to continue dominating the luxury market. After the formal meeting ended, I approached several longtime residents to introduce myself and learn more about their experiences with real estate transactions in the community. The conversations were enlightening, revealing a pattern of dissatisfaction with Vanessa's approach to representing both buyers and sellers in the same transactions, a practice that created potential conflicts of interest, but was technically legal under Texas real estate regulations. "She's effective, but she's also aggressive," explained Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a cardiologist who had purchased her home in Waterstone Estates 2 years earlier. "When we were buying, she kept pushing us to make decisions quickly, claiming other buyers were interested in the same property. Later, we found out she was representing the sellers too, which explained why she was so eager to close the deal at the price they were asking." Another resident, James Hartwell, who owned a successful technology consulting firm, shared similar concerns about Vanessa's business practices. "She sold our neighbor's house last year, and the whole process was rushed in a way that didn't seem to serve the seller's best interests. The property went on the market on a Monday and was under contract by Friday, with no opportunity for competitive bidding or market testing." These conversations revealed that while Vanessa was undeniably successful, her methods had created an undercurrent of dissatisfaction among property owners who felt they hadn't received the level of service and advocacy they expected from a premium real estate agent. This dissatisfaction represented an opportunity that could be exploited if I could position myself as someone offering a superior alternative to Vanessa's approach. The following week, I attended a similar community meeting at Pinnacle Ridge, where the dynamics were slightly different, but equally illuminating. This development attracted buyers who valued privacy and exclusivity over social amenities, and the residents I met were more focused on protecting their investments than building community relationships. During the meeting, I learned that Vanessa had been working with the developers to expedite the approval process for a planned expansion of the community that would add 25 new home sites. Her involvement in the expansion planning gave her advanced knowledge of upcoming inventory and development timelines that other agents wouldn't have access to until the information became public. More importantly, I discovered that several residents were concerned about the impact of rapid expansion on property values and community character. The expansion plans called for slightly smaller lots and more affordable price points, which longtime residents worried would dilute the exclusivity that had attracted them to Pinnacle Ridge initially. "We invested here because of the community's commitment to maintaining high standards," explained Rebecca Foster, a prominent attorney who served on the Homeowners Association board. "If they're going to change the development parameters to increase density and lower price points, that fundamentally alters the value proposition we bought into." This tension between existing residents and development expansion plans created another opportunity for strategic intervention. If I could position myself as an advocate for protecting property values and community standards, I might be able to build support for challenging the expansion plans that Vanessa was promoting. After the Pinnacle Ridge meeting, I spent several hours researching the legal and regulatory framework governing planned unit developments in Texas. What I discovered was that homeowners associations had significant authority to challenge expansion plans that violated the original development agreements or that weren't properly presented to existing residents for approval. The expansion that Vanessa was promoting appeared to violate several provisions of the original Pinnacle Ridge development agreement, particularly regarding minimum lot sizes and architectural standards. If these violations could be documented And presented effectively, the expansion could be delayed or modified in ways that would undermine Vanessa's exclusive partnership with the developers. My research also revealed that Texas real estate regulations required agents to disclose any financial interests they had in development projects they were marketing to clients. If Vanessa's partnership arrangements with the developers included equity participation or profit-sharing agreements that she wasn't disclosing to her clients, she could be violating professional regulations in ways that would jeopardize her license and reputation. Claire's experiences at Meridian Heights proved even more valuable for understanding Vanessa's operations and identifying potential vulnerabilities. The ultra-exclusive nature of this community meant that residents were more sophisticated about real estate investments and more demanding about the quality of professional services they received. The interesting thing about Meridian Heights, Claire reported during one of our weekly strategy sessions, is that several residents have been asking questions about Vanessa's dual representation arrangements and whether they're getting the best possible outcomes on their transactions. Claire had learned that Vanessa's practice of representing both buyers and sellers in the same transactions was creating situations where clients on both sides of deals were questioning whether their interests were being properly protected. While dual representation was legal, it required careful disclosure and management to ensure both parties understood the limitations of the arrangement. There's something else, Claire continued. One of the residents mentioned that Vanessa has been encouraging several homeowners to sell their properties, claiming she has buyers lined up who are willing to pay premium prices. But when they ask for details about these buyers, she's vague about their qualifications and motivations. This information aligned with what Amy Rodriguez had told me about Vanessa pushing clients toward quick sales, and it suggested that Vanessa might be manipulating market conditions to create inventory for specific buyers. If Marcus was one of these undisclosed buyers, Vanessa could be violating regulations requiring agents to disclose conflicts of interest and material relationships that might affect their professional judgment. The picture that emerged from our community involvement was of a real estate agent who had built impressive market share through exclusive partnerships and aggressive tactics, but who had also created significant vulnerabilities through questionable business practices and client dissatisfaction. More importantly, we now had direct access to the client base that represented the foundation of Vanessa's professional success. Our next step was to begin documenting specific instances where Vanessa's business practices might have violated professional regulations or failed to serve her clients' best interests. This documentation would serve two purposes. It would provide evidence for potential regulatory complaints, and it would give us credibility when we approached her clients with alternative approaches to real estate transactions. I hired a private investigator with expertise in real estate fraud to help document Vanessa's business practices and identify any regulatory violations that could be reported to the Texas Real Estate Commission. The investigator, Maria Santos, had extensive experience with cases involving agent misconduct and was skilled at gathering evidence that would meet regulatory standards for formal complaints. What you're describing sounds like it could involve several different types of violations, Maria explained during our initial consultation. Dual representation without proper disclosure, failure to provide adequate market analysis, and potentially undisclosed conflicts of interest. The challenge will be gathering evidence that meets the Commission's standards for formal proceedings. Maria's investigation would focus on documenting specific transactions where Vanessa's practices had disadvantaged her clients, identifying patterns of behavior that suggested systematic rather than isolated problems, and gathering testimony from clients who felt they hadn't received appropriate representation. While Maria began her investigation, Claire and I started building relationships with residents in all three developments who had expressed dissatisfaction with their real estate experiences. Our approach was subtle but systematic, positioning ourselves as concerned neighbors who were interested in ensuring all residents received the level of professional service they deserved. These relationships proved invaluable for gathering additional intelligence about Vanessa's operations and identifying opportunities for strategic intervention. We learned about upcoming transactions, planned developments, and community concerns that would affect property values and market conditions throughout these exclusive neighborhoods. One particularly valuable relationship was with Dr. Michael Chen, a successful orthopedic surgeon who owned properties in both Waterstone Estates and Meridian Heights. Dr. Chen had become frustrated with Vanessa's handling of a recent sale, and he was interested in finding an alternative agent for future transactions. The problem with Vanessa Sterling, Dr. Chen explained during a conversation at the Waterstone Estates pool, is that she's more interested in closing deals quickly than in making sure her clients get the best possible outcomes. When I sold my property in Meridian Heights last year, I felt like she was working harder to satisfy the buyers than to maximize my return on investment. Dr. Chen's experience was typical of what we were hearing from other residents, and it confirmed that Vanessa's business model prioritized volume and speed over client advocacy and service quality. This approach had made her successful in the short term, but it had also created a pool of dissatisfied clients who were open to working with agents who offered a more client-focused approach. The intelligence we gathered during this period also revealed that Marcus's construction company was involved in infrastructure planning for the next phase of development at Meridian Heights. This involvement gave him access to detailed information about development timelines, design specifications, and marketing strategies that would be incredibly valuable to a real estate agent trying to position clients advantageously. More concerning was our discovery that Marcus and Vanessa had formed a second business entity focused specifically on luxury real estate development, with plans to acquire land adjacent to existing developments for their own projects. This new venture represented a direct conflict with Marcus's existing business partnerships and fiduciary obligations, and it provided additional evidence of the systematic way they were planning their professional and personal future together. The scope of their collaboration was more extensive than I had initially realized, encompassing not just personal relationships and individual business activities, but a comprehensive strategy for dominating Austin's luxury real estate market. Through insider information, exclusive partnerships, and coordinated development activities. As the full picture of their operations became clear, I realized that my strategy needed to be equally comprehensive and coordinated. Simply disrupting Vanessa's individual transactions wouldn't be sufficient to address the systematic advantages they were creating through their partnership. I needed to challenge their entire business model and the exclusive relationships that made their success possible. The properties Claire and I had acquired gave us the foundation for this broader strategy, but we needed to leverage our ownership positions more aggressively to maximum impact on their operations. This meant becoming active participants in community governance, development planning, and the social networks that influence decision-making in these exclusive neighborhoods. Over the following weeks, we began implementing a more aggressive approach to our community involvement. We volunteered for homeowners association committees, participated in development planning meetings, and established ourselves as advocates for protecting property values and community standards. These activities positioned us as influential voices in decisions about future development and community management. Our growing influence in these communities also gave us access to information about upcoming property transactions, development opportunities, and regulatory issues that would affect the luxury real estate market. This information allowed us to anticipate Vanessa's strategies and position ourselves to counteract her advantages. The transformation from passive property owners to active community leaders was remarkably quick, facilitated by the sophisticated professional networks and social dynamics that characterized these exclusive developments. Within 6 weeks of our initial property purchases, Claire and I had established ourselves as respected voices in all 3 communities, with growing influence over decisions that would directly impact Vanessa's business operations. As our influence grew, we began to understand the full extent of the opportunities available to us for disrupting Vanessa's business model and challenging the exclusive partnerships that had made her success possible. The woman who had discovered her husband's betrayal was gone, replaced by someone who understood exactly how to use superior resources and strategic positioning to ensure that betrayal came with consequences neither Marcus nor Vanessa could have anticipated. The moment I had been building toward arrived on a crisp October evening when Marcus announced he wanted to discuss our future over dinner at our anniversary restaurant. He had chosen the same upscale establishment where we had celebrated 15 years of marriage just 12 months earlier, apparently believing the sentimental location would soften the blow of what he was about to reveal. His miscalculation was breathtaking in its arrogance. As we sat across from each other at the candlelit table, Marcus launched into a carefully rehearsed speech about growing apart, needing different things from life, and believing we would both be happier if we pursued separate paths. He spoke with the practiced sincerity of someone who had convinced himself that his betrayal was actually an act of kindness, a way of setting us both free to find more suitable partners. "I've been thinking about this for months, Rachel," he said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone he used when explaining construction details to clients who didn't understand technical specifications. "We've built a good life together, but I think we both know we've outgrown what we had. I want us to handle this transition as maturely as possible, for both our sakes." I listened to his performance with the same detached interest I might bring to watching a poorly written television drama, occasionally nodding as if I was processing his revelations for the first time. When he paused, clearly expecting some kind of emotional response, I simply took a sip of wine and asked if he had given any thought to the practical arrangements that would be necessary. "Actually, I have," Marcus replied, looking relieved that I wasn't creating the scene he had obviously been dreading. "I've consulted with an attorney about the best way to divide our assets fairly. Given the complexity of our investments and the business interests involved, we'll need to be strategic about how we structure everything." The casual way he mentioned consulting with an attorney confirmed what I had suspected for weeks. This conversation wasn't the beginning of Marcus's planning process. It was the culmination of months of preparation that had been conducted entirely without my knowledge or input. He had already decided our future and was now presenting me with the results of his deliberations as if I was simply another party whose consent was required to finalize a business transaction. "That's very thoughtful of you," I said with a smile. That didn't reach my eyes. "I'm curious about your timeline for all of this. When were you thinking we should begin the formal process?" Marcus's relief was palpable as he interpreted my calm response as acceptance of his plans. "I was hoping we could start working with attorneys next week. The sooner we get the legal framework in place, the sooner we can both move forward with our lives." His eagerness to accelerate the timeline told me everything I needed to know about his motivations. This wasn't about a gradual realization that our marriage wasn't working. This was about clearing legal obstacles so he could begin his new life, with Vanessa Sterling without the complications of an unresolved divorce. "Before we involve attorneys," I said, setting down my wine glass with deliberate precision, "I think there's something you should know about how our financial situation has changed recently." For the first time that evening, Marcus looked genuinely uncertain. His carefully prepared script hadn't included provisions for me introducing new information into the conversation, and I could see him struggling to maintain his composure while trying to anticipate what I might reveal. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice taking on a slightly sharper edge that revealed the anxiety beneath his practiced calm. I reached into my purse and withdrew a folder containing property deeds, financial statements, and legal documents that represented the foundation of everything I had built over the past 3 months. As I placed the folder on the table between us, I watched Marcus's expression shift from confusion to concern to something approaching alarm. "Over the past few months, I've made some significant real estate investments," I began, opening the folder to reveal the first page of property records. "I think you'll find them particularly interesting, given your professional relationship with Vanessa Sterling." Marcus's face went pale as he recognized the property addresses listed on the documents. His eyes darted across the pages, taking in the scope of what I had accomplished while he had been planning what he thought would be his strategic exit from our marriage. I now own substantial holdings in Waterstone Estates, Pinnacle Ridge, and Meridian Heights. I continued, my voice remaining conversational despite the gravity of what I was revealing. In fact, I control enough properties in each development to significantly influence market conditions and community decisions. The transformation in Marcus's demeanor was immediate and dramatic. The confident man who had been explaining his plans for our future was replaced by someone who was clearly struggling to process the implications of what he was learning. He flipped through the documents with increasing agitation, his breathing becoming more rapid as he began to understand the full scope of my strategic positioning. How did you... He started, then stopped, apparently realizing that the method was less important than the result. This represents millions of dollars in investments. How did you finance purchases of this magnitude without me knowing? I smiled with genuine pleasure at his question, having anticipated this moment for weeks. I liquidated several of my personal investment accounts and restructured some of our joint holdings. Everything was done legally and with proper documentation, though I chose to handle the transactions privately to avoid unnecessary complications. The revelation that I had been operating independently while he had been planning his betrayal was clearly more disturbing to Marcus than the financial implications of my property acquisitions. He had assumed that his superior business experience and professional networks gave him complete control over our financial future, and discovering that I had been executing a sophisticated strategy without his knowledge or involvement was devastating to his self-image. But why would you? Marcus began, then trailed off as the obvious answer occurred to him. His face shifted through a series of expressions as he processed the possibility that his secret activities might not have been as secret as he had believed. I know about Vanessa, I said simply, deciding that the time for subtlety had passed. I know about your business partnership, your development consulting company, and your plans for building a life together. I've known for months. The admission hit Marcus like a physical blow. He sat back in his chair, staring at me with a combination of shock and something that might have been respect, though it was difficult to distinguish from fear given the circumstances. If you've known for months, he said slowly, then everything you've been doing has been specifically designed to position myself advantageously for exactly this conversation, I finished. Did you really think I would just accept your decision to restructure our lives according to your preferences? Did you imagine I would simply agree to whatever settlement you and your attorney had decided was fair? Marcus was quiet for several minutes, clearly trying to recalibrate his understanding of the situation and identify options for responding to developments he hadn't anticipated. When he finally spoke, his voice carried none of the confidence he had displayed earlier in the evening. What do you want, Rachel? The question was simple, but it represented a complete reversal of the power dynamics that had defined our conversation from the beginning. Marcus was no longer the person controlling our interaction. He was someone seeking to understand the terms under which his strategic miscalculations might be forgiven or mitigated. I want you to understand the position you've put yourself in, I replied. Vanessa Sterling's professional success depends entirely on her exclusive relationships with developers and her reputation in the luxury market. I now control significant portions of that market. Every property transaction she wants to complete, every development project she wants to participate in, every client relationship she wants to maintain will require my cooperation or, at minimum, my neutrality. Marcus was beginning to grasp the implications of what I was describing, and the growing alarm in his expression told me he understood exactly how devastating my position could be for Vanessa's business prospects. Furthermore, I continued, the regulatory investigation into her business practices is proceeding quite well. It turns out that several of her dual representation arrangements violated disclosure requirements, and her partnership agreements with developers created conflicts of interest that weren't properly reported to her clients. This revelation was the final piece of information Marcus needed to understand the full scope of his miscalculation. Not only had I positioned myself to control the market conditions that Vanessa depended on for her success, but I had also initiated formal proceedings that could result in the suspension or revocation of her professional license. The business partnership you established with her is particularly problematic, I added, enjoying the way Marcus's face continued to pale with each new piece of information. Using insider information from your construction projects to benefit. Your real estate development consulting company represents a clear violation of your fiduciary obligations to your existing business partners. David Walsh has been very interested in learning about these arrangements. The mention of his business partner's name was the final blow to Marcus's composure. David Walsh represented not just a professional relationship, but a friendship that had been the foundation of Marcus's career success. If David learned about Marcus's secret business activities and the conflicts of interest they represented, the consequences would extend far beyond our marriage to encompass everything Marcus had worked to build professionally. You've destroyed everything, Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the hollow tone of someone who had just realized the full extent of his losses. No, I corrected. You destroyed everything when you decided to build your future on betrayal and deception. I simply made sure that your actions came with appropriate consequences. The remainder of our dinner passed in near silence, with Marcus occasionally asking questions about the legal and financial implications of what I had revealed, and me providing answers with the same calm professionalism I might bring to discussing marketing strategies with a client. The dynamic between us had been completely transformed, with Marcus now clearly understanding that he was not negotiating from a position of strength. When we returned home that evening, Marcus retreated to his study and spent several hours making phone calls, presumably to Vanessa and his attorney, trying to understand his options for responding to the strategic disaster he had created. I could hear the agitation in his voice through the closed door, and I knew that his carefully planned exit from our marriage had become a desperate attempt to minimize the damage from his miscalculations. The following morning brought confirmation that my strategy had achieved its intended effect. Vanessa Sterling called our house, ostensibly to speak with Marcus about a business matter, but actually to gauge my knowledge of their relationship and my intentions regarding their future plans. When I answered the phone and calmly suggested that she and Marcus might want to reconsider their business arrangements, given the changing market conditions in Austin's luxury developments, her response was immediate and panicked. Within a week, Marcus had moved out of our house and into a modest apartment across town, his dreams of a luxury lifestyle with Vanessa having collapsed under the weight of regulatory investigations, business partnership disputes, and the systematic disruption of every professional relationship that had made their plans possible. David Walsh had indeed been very interested in learning about Marcus's undisclosed business activities, and their partnership was dissolved with Marcus forfeiting his equity stake to compensate for the damages his actions had caused. Vanessa. Sterling's real estate career effectively ended when the Texas Real Estate Commission suspended her license, pending a full investigation of her business practices. The exclusive partnerships with developers that had been the foundation of her success were terminated when evidence of her regulatory violations became public, and several of her former clients filed complaints seeking compensation for transactions, where they felt she had failed to represent their interest properly. The properties Claire and I had acquired proved to be excellent investments, appreciating significantly as Austin's luxury market continued to grow. More importantly, our ownership positions in these exclusive developments gave us ongoing influence over market conditions and development decisions that ensured our financial success while preventing anyone else from establishing the kind of dominant position that Vanessa had previously enjoyed. Marcus's attempts to reconcile our marriage began approximately 6 weeks after he had moved out, when the full scope of his professional and financial losses became clear. His approach was tentative at first, suggesting that we might be able to work through our differences if we both made compromises and approached our relationship with renewed commitment. When those overtures were politely but firmly declined, his efforts became more desperate, culminating in a formal letter from his attorney requesting a reconciliation meeting to discuss mutually beneficial arrangements for rebuilding their marriage. The irony of Marcus crawling back to me after orchestrating what he had intended to be his triumphant escape was not lost on me, though I took no particular pleasure in his obvious desperation. The man who had planned to discard me for a younger, more professionally useful partner had discovered that betrayal came with consequences he had never imagined possible, and that the woman he had underestimated was far more dangerous than the real estate agent he had overestimated. The final chapter of this story was written 6 months later, when Marcus and I finalized our divorce on terms that reflected the strategic realities of our respective positions rather than his original assumptions about his negotiating advantages. The settlement was generous to me and devastating to him, though no more so than the natural consequences of his choices deserved. As I signed the final documents in my attorney's office, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from the shocked wife, discovering her husband's betrayal at his birthday party, to the strategic victor who had systematically dismantled everything he had tried to build with his affair partner. The transformation had been profound and permanent, teaching me capabilities I had never known I possessed, and confidence I would carry into whatever future I chose to create. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.